So we met. How long ago was it?
It's got to have been early this last year, so maybe several months,
Yeah,
January or something.
You invited me up to Colville.
Yep.
And Colville, I began to get calls from Colville because things were happening in Colville. You were, what was happening in Colville?
Well, we saw a huge influx of homeless as well in our small town. And I'm assuming it was partly the result of some of these court cases that decided you could not have people move off of public streets and out of public doorways. And so Colville built an encampment, partly to have a place so that people could be moved from the public business and over to a specific place. But we had probably 75 residents of that encampment for a couple of years, and now it's being closed down and cleaned out because of the new rulings. But it really changed.
That was when that Martin, Boise, and you couldn't really, you didn't have a shelter, so they could camp.
I mean, we have warming centers and things like that, but it probably got people asking questions. What kinds of resources does Colville need that will actually help people? It changed the culture of Colville though for a while.
I find it interesting because most of our people that are tuned in know about Colville, but you have all these towns that are similar to Colville in size. And how do they handle homelessness? They have no facilities, no shelters. And then a shelter, Housing First Project is being brought to Colville, and so all the phone rings. I hear, Phil, what's going on? What's happening in Spokane? Do we want this in Colville? And what's going to go on? And I think Housing First projects are all run different. And I don't know if the one in Colville will be chronic homeless. You know what I mean? But again, the whole model of Housing First is changing because of the new administration. But somewhere along the line, this whole issue got a hold of you. And what are you doing today?
So I've been a teacher for the last 10 or 12 years. I've homeschooled my kids, but we have a thriving homeschool community up in Stevens County. And so we've always had classes with lots of kids involved. But I decided to stop teaching this last year because my kids are almost ready to be graduated, and it was time for them to be lectured by someone else in a class.
And when she says a thriving homeschool program, you have, the time I visited and shared, how many students are a part of that?
Boy, we had probably 45 teenagers who were coming every couple of weeks to tackle issues. Great economic principles of law, current events, which is why we were discussing poverty and homelessness. And so because I stopped teaching, I happened to see that the Discovery Institute out of Seattle was looking for someone to work on their Fix Homelessness initiative as a research fellow. And so I've stepped into that role, which has been a deep dive, quick education, still in the middle of it.
You jumped into that when?
Mid-August. Yep.
So here we are just 2 months later. What have you learned? Because here you are, an educator, a research person, and my mind, what have you been learning?
So let me take you on a little reflection that I had today. So you know that I live 80 miles north of here.
Yeah.
And I left early this morning and I came down to Spokane to participate in UGM's downtown outreach. And I have an event this evening that I'll go to. So I have all these hours in between just in the city of Spokane. I have, I'll need a change of clothes for later. And it got me thinking about being somewhat displaced, right? I'm not close to my resources. I'm not even really sure, well, where should I use a restroom if I need it?
You're more than welcome over here when you're done.
And this is part of what I was thinking. So I have a warm vehicle. I drove myself up to Hobby Lobby to use the restroom when I felt like it. And I have, all this time. And I just started thinking, here I am. If I couldn't get into Hobby Lobby, I have friends in Spokane who wouldn't mind if I just showed up on their doorstep. Probably friends of theirs. I could show up on those people's doorstep and mention my friend and get in, and I thought, gosh, if I ever got into trouble, if my car broke down, I've got credit cards or debit cards that I could call a tow truck. My husband, my dad, my sons would all show up from anywhere if I needed their help, Suppose they weren't available, there's probably hundreds of people who I'm acquainted with who I could call in a moment of need. And So I was thinking about the folks we were meeting downtown today, and just thinking about how much had to be lost from a normal human life to get into that position. And I almost can't imagine losing that much. But I thought, if you introduced addiction to my story, I could see how all of that would be lost in a fairly short amount of time because of what it does to someone's life. And just
that's
how
that's a great
insurmountable.
illustration. And at the same time, too, there are some that would never have the support that you had.
Never would have started there.
Both sides of the equation.
Yes.
If you had it, it can be lost because of addiction.
Yep.
And some never had it.
Some have never even had that chance. So the idea to them of even getting to that place in life. And it got me thinking about, what is compassion? What is the issue that we're dealing with? The idea of leaving someone in addiction with no chance. If you can lose everything from that, you're never going to gain any of that when you're still in addiction. And so I thought about the compassion. As a teacher, I love to know what words really mean. And compassion is a Latin word, 2 Latin words, cum and passion, with suffering. So to be compassionate isn't just to feel bad for someone. It's not just to make them comfortable. It is to suffer with them to something better, to bring them out of something. And so, there were lots of times when my kids were little, they'd get a splinter, and it'd be quite painful, and if we didn't require them to allow us to remove that splinter, they would not have allowed it, because they're not going to choose the discomfort, the pain of that moment. Even if you told them a week from now, your foot is going to be festering, you're going to lose your foot, right? They would still need us to suffer with them through the pain of healing, through the pain of treatment. And so that's what compassion is. And I don't know if you know Marvin Olasky, his work at World Magazine, and he wrote a book called The Tragedy of American Compassion, where he actually discussed what is effective compassion. What are the components of that? And he put it in ABC form, A through G. A, first, it's affiliation, it's family. They need to be connected to the people who they have some claim on, some care for, who care for them, if they can. Robert mentioned some people can't, and that's understandable. So the second B is bonding. If they don't have family, they need to bond with other people, and they need to belong. And even that word, belong, is to be for a long time, to be welcomed, to be endured, to be helped for a long period of time, which is messy and it requires a lot of effort. C is categorization. Not everyone comes from the same place. They don't have the same needs. There's a beautiful verse in the book of Thessalonians that talks about helping people in different ways. And it says, admonish the idle, encourage the faint-hearted, and help the weak, and be patient with all of them. But they have different root needs. And need different attention, different responses. So to categorize people and understand where they're coming from. D is to be discerning. So not everyone is what they seem. It takes some thought. It takes some careful assessment. E is employment. You guys at UGM, you understand the importance and value of work, the dignity, the blessing of work. We need that. We need to contribute to our own care and to the care of others. That's just a very human thing.
I've come full circle. Let me jump in here. Full circle to realize that I often ask people this question: tell me about the different character of God, and they'll list love, mercy, justice, all those. But no one hardly ever says work. And he worked 6 days, and then he rested. And that is DNA is in us, that there's a sense of fulfillment and dignity that comes from work.
Right.
That's why we put an emphasis on it.
Yes.
And when you see people that are just every day doing nothing, what sense of dignity do they have?
No.
You know
or what
I mean?
Creation can they point to that they've brought forth in any way? Yeah.
So appreciate
employment, freedom, and you had business owners here talking about, they need the freedom to prosper, to work and enjoy the fruit of their work. There's this concept in law called quiet enjoyment, which is the freedom to enjoy what you have earned and what you've created. And when that is taken away or not protected, then there's the kind of robbery that's happening, and we tend to forget those citizens in the looking at the ones who seem to be suffering so acutely. And lastly, we need God. We are spiritual creatures. We are created beings, and we need our Creator. And so compassion includes all of those. Compassion is not, so when you look at Housing First, it's almost like a hospice program, oh, you're suffering, and in fact, this malady is going to kill you if you keep at it, but we're just going to offer you the chance to change and then keep you comfortable while you die. If you choose not to change, that is not compassion. So just trying to understand how those things apply to, UGM is living them out, making them available, but that needs to be done on a wide scale to make a difference.
So with this new job that you have, research, what's that look like? I mean, data, where are you going? How are you going about it? I'm intrigued by that.
Yeah.
So
it's a lot of digging. I'm reading lawsuits and documents and court cases, and you can do public records requests to try to find out some of the things you mentioned today. Where are the hot spots for law enforcement activity? Those kinds of things are usually gleaned out of requesting a public accounting for those things. So it's really all kinds of sources. Robert Marbut mentioned federal spending, so that's looking at budgets and where's the money going. Counts, and he conducted his own count, so that's research to actually get on the ground and find out how many people are here, where did they come from, and then just compiling all of those things.
How much studying have you done on the amount of and I always like to say, our tax dollars that's going to solve this problem of homelessness? I've been doing this 39 years, and I remember speaking and saying, looking up, HUD gives out this many $1 million. Now it's in the billions.
Yes.
It's only escalated.
Yeah.
And I don't know what your studies, where it's at today, but we've spent more money than we've ever spent, and yet the problems, we haven't solved anything.
No.
So at what point, as we heard earlier, Obama was going to end it in 10 years. There's always a plan to end homelessness, and we've spent more money, and yet we have more homelessness.
Right.
So
we create. I love that UnionGospelMission is privately funded, because that is compassion. Someone has suffered, if you want to say. Work is a form of discomfort, even though we're blessed by it. They have earned that, and then they have chosen to contribute it to this ministry. When you put government in the middle of that process, you disconnect the giver, the worker, from the receiver. And that always causes problems, and it always siphons off some of the value of that. And it creates what some people refer to as the homeless industrial complex, which is all this money in between, all these jobs that are reliant on particular funding streams. So, even if you are part of a program like maybe a Housing First facility that is obviously not helping the people in it, but your job is dependent on keeping that program going, even if you're a compassionate person, you're just going to have this very human tendency to circle the wagons and protect that program. And it's billions and billions and billions. King County just announced an audit report on $1.5 billion of spending that happened in the last couple of years with COVID relief funds. And they're finding vast amounts of fraud and corruption and waste because the money was just quickly moved out with the philosophy of let's get it out to where it's needed. But all along the way, it was just really easy to scoop some of that money off until the worker who's working and actually sweating to earn that money is totally disconnected from any results that are being received. And you end up with agencies that are very protective of their budgets. You end up with this really perverse, like, oh, we're serving more and more people
Right.
in this program that's meant to serve homeless people. And so we're growing and we're actually, and it's really backwards.
When it was supposed to end it and not grow, but
Yeah, but people in it, they don't want to see their job disappear. Yeah.
Well, that's where the point in time is interesting to me, because that's always been something that they've aggressively recruited more and more people. Let's get those numbers up, because based on the numbers, the more money that flows in.
Yeah.
And so, it's fascinating. I often say this, if the whole homeless thing was about how well we did and there was accountability, like I feel like the people that support us, our partners in ministry, if we're not doing what we're doing, then they shouldn't give.
Yeah.
And I think that's why people support this, because they know lives are being transformed. We're holding people accountable. We're loving them. And I just wish we could do that. And it's interesting with different administrations. I feel like the accountability, someone's finally saying our taxpayer money is our money. How is it working? And I hope some of these shifts, what we're seeing with what's going to be expected in cities, with Housing First, there's a shift in how we help people and love them. But it's a culture shift too, because we haven't done it.
And there are, I think Nadine mentioned, these underlying ideologies and philosophies, and if you believe that if you don't believe that there's a God who cares about individuals, that changes your perception of what a person is and how you can treat them and their value. And it changes your idea of what they need. If a person is born with a need for his Redeemer and born into a corrupt world and needing his healing from that, that's very different from someone who's basically good and just needs their needs met so they can blossom into their goodness, and you're going to react very differently and plan very differently. But you mentioned the executive order, President Trump's, at the federal level, there's a very different set of parameters and ideas coming down, and hopefully they will mean good things. So he is taking away billions of dollars of federal funding from Housing First, from jurisdictions that refuse to enforce basic public safety and health laws, that allow open drug use. And harm reduction programs, which are really just paying for someone to continue their addiction. He's allowing for or considering how we can reinstitute good civil commitment laws where someone maybe is in danger from their own, mental illness, or maybe they're a danger to others. So how can we find a way to bring services to them and require that? How can we make it about treatment and recovery? How can we make sure that there's accountability and results in programs? And those things are all really important for every single one of us. I know about myself that if there weren't some painful consequences for certain things in life, I would not make all the same choices, right? It's those painful consequences that might get me up and doing on a day when I feel like being lazy instead, and so those are just human. We need that. And it's not cruel. It's just part of the world we live in. So
in your studies and your research, I feel like sometimes we go backwards. So we talk about addiction and mental illness being the two issues that contribute to what we see. So you're from Colville. Do you know much about Medical Lake?
Not much, no.
Okay. So Medical Lake is a city that has a huge facilities on it where we used to put people that had mental illness. Okay. Now, this is fascinating to me. If you drive out there, there's a brand new cemetery for all of those that have died in service. And it's on the west side of Medical Lake. And then the lake sits there, the end of the lake, and you'll see two old barns sitting there that are falling in. And I was out fishing with my friend who worked in Medical Lake at the jail system and knows more about the history than I did. I said, those barns fascinate me. And you know what he said? Those used to be part of the mental institute, that the people that stayed there also did different types of jobs. And we shut those down in the 70s when a movie came out, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And now here we are all these years later having this discussion, Well, if someone's harmful to themselves, can we detain them? When we used to have a place when we recognized mental illness existed, we had a place to put them where they could thrive. But because of what we saw, a little negative part of that, we shut them down. It's interesting to me in the history of our society and where we're at, and saying not only is addiction but mental illness a problem, the very things that we had in place that were effective, we shut them down. And so I know that it's just fascinating to look at the history.
Yeah.
And I often ask, what have we learned? How do we go back and say, this worked? How do we recreate it? Because stability of continuity of doing the same thing day in and day out for mentally ill people, it's the best thing for them. It's a great environment. But anyway, I just share that in your research. It'll be interesting as we're saying, what are solutions? Not only, we know what solutions are for addiction, what we need to do, but for mental illness. I'd love to see some of these places open up again and do what we used to do. But I don't know if that's a pipe dream or a reality. But in your research, it'd be interesting to explore that and say what worked back then, because we're wanting places to help. How can we recreate some of the good that was there?
Well, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because deinstitutionalization was a big part of why we have the crisis we have now. But we have these sort of slogans. Homelessness is a housing problem. Homelessness is a human problem, and that human problem is also present in the staff of mental hospitals and in everyone who runs an institution. And so there were abuses in some of those places because of the humans in them. And so everybody needs the redemptive love of Jesus Christ. And we do need good institutions, and they could be places of healing and refuge, but it depends on who's in them. And so we have, places today that just look wonderful on a brochure, and they're not wonderful places, and they could be. They could be, but that is part of the human problem that also must be addressed.
So let me close with that. I agree 100%. I have said this since day one. We built all this housing first. Great buildings, great apartments. They could be entirely different in how they were run and what we would do with that housing. 600 places to reward people that want recovery, that go and work on their addiction. Could be a whole different environment.
It could. And we can get very confused if we lose that truth in the midst of, well, this is what it's meant to be. It's meant to be. This is what it could be. It needs to be that, but that's a big job. Well,
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Pleasure to talk with you again, Phil.